Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are starting a new book, a new study, the book of Daniel, the prophecies of Daniel. And Daniel by far is one of my favorite books of prophecy because uh, it is different than the other writings of the prophets. Um, And let me give you a little background on that. And this is going to be a kind of an extended introduction to Daniel because I want us to set the setting here. But the when we when we started our section of the writings of the prophet, the last section of the Old Testament, which by the way, after Daniel, we only have three more books to the entire um, Old Testament. And that actually will conclude this journey of our studying all the way through the Bible. We would have completed the entire Bible, but more on that later. Um, but the writings of the prophet, as they are arranged in our Bibles, I did not follow. And the reason why is because I wanted to give a more chronological take. So when we think about as they are arranged in our Bible, there is the major prophet and then the minor prophet. By the way, that is not necessarily something that God has um, dictated. And it's not worth for us to debate on it because in some cases, if you want to say in terms of who is a major um, what constitutes a major prophet? Let me just say something. Daniel by far is one of the major prophets. Now remember, his prophecies are only 12 chapters long. So if you want to categorize the major versus minor prophets by the size of the book, that's not the best application to that. For example, can Jonah be considered a I mean, is Jonah a minor prophet simply by the size of the book? And remember, Jesus quoted from Jonah. But I'm kind of getting off base here. When we come to the writings of the prophets, though, a lot of it it's not just size, but also what you can say God considers a prophet of importance, the kind of information that was the prophecy that was given. But when we think about a timeline and the way they are arranged, so you have the major prophets first, and Daniel is included in that, and then you start with Hosea. The problem with that, of course, is that you're going back, over 200 years from the prophecy of Hosea. So what I did was I started with then, as best as we could, the dating of them, the dating of the prophets. So Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah. These would be the most of these prophets predate, with the exception of Zephaniah and I'm going to say uh, I got a better dating of this. Um, Hosea, Joel, Amos, uh, Obadiah. We did study that, but I kind of regret that because I think Obadiah is much dated much later. But then Jonah and then Micah, I believe, predates Isaiah. Okay, it predates, and the reason why I started with those books was I wanted the feel, see the prophecy, and the time. In other words, God begins to warn Israel to turn from their wickedness. He's warning them, and you see him using the statement, "I'm sending you prophets. I sent you prophets time and time again, rising up early, going up late, warning Israel to turn from their sins." They don't. Then we come to the book of Isaiah, and we're kind of sliding kind of into kind of the home plate where the coming doom, the coming judgment of Israel, where he begins to tell them, hey, Babylon is coming. The king of the north is coming. And along with that, I believe around the same time, I'm going to say Nahum, which one? And then around the time of Jeremiah, which Jeremiah, if you remember, was the death of the nation itself. So right around that time, you also had Habakkuk just before that. So then the prophecies then after the Babylonian exile, you're going to have Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Now, the reason why it's important to kind of understand what God is saying, and I think the time frame in which he is saying it. So when we get to the Ezekiel, and remember we said that Ezekiel and Daniel were contemporaries. When the Babylonian exile happened, they started carrying away, and I'm going to get to that in a moment to kind of refresh our minds on the kind of what's going on with these prophecies, with these books, what is going on with Israel. And I think it's extremely important to understand that, because I think a lot of bad theology comes when we do not study the entire counsel of God. Okay, I'm gonna come back to this in a moment, but let me finish my sort of timeline here. So here is a timeline. I like this chart. It is just a kind of a timeline of the Old Testament. So as you see, we come, if you look at Jeremiah here, you look at Jeremiah. Let's see if I can. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Give me a little more. So you look at Jeremiah, and where's my dates at? Here's what I want. So you look at. I want you to see this one at the top, Jehoiakim's, right? So around 600 and 609 BC, right? So I want you to see that Jehoiakim, and then you see Jeremiah comes along and he's prophesying. Now you see Daniel right here around 605. And then you see Jehoiakim exile around 597. I want you to remember these names when we get into the book of Daniel. That's why I want to go through this as a timeline. As a timeline here. And then you see Ezekiel, and then you come down, and then you see the fall of Jerusalem, but you also see Daniel's prophecy around the same time, okay, 537 BC. Now, let me come out of this. I want you to see that because the writings, as I said, the writings of the prophets, as far as the significance of it, why do we have these prophecies? Well, they serve several reasons. One, they tell God's dealings, God's will, God's plan and purpose for the nation of Israel. So that's one purpose. Most of the writings of the prophet, in fact, all of the writings of the prophet prophesied about the nation of Israel. All of them, even Daniel, okay? I am utterly amazed when I hear people say, well, Israel is replaced by the church. The church is the new Israel. It is impossible to come up with that conclusion by reading scripture. You're just not reading it, okay? So what we kind of have as a timeline, and this is where Daniel's going to come in at. Daniel's going to come in is that we see a prophecy. And in fact, I think it's, let me do this. I'm doing this in a little different way. Oh my, why didn't it not? Okay. For some reason I'm having, let's do this again. Let's do it this way. Okay. All right. So here we go. All right. I think I want to go to Matthew. I just want to show you something. Again, this is kind of an image. This is one of the. I want to intersect some thoughts here as far as the Old Testament prophecy. The purpose, first of all, of the Old Testament prophecy, and then ultimately, then understanding what is going on. So let's go to Matthew. I believe I could here. So all right. Now this is. I want you to see something here. So in this genealogy of Jesus, you start with Abraham, and then as you can see, we come down to David, and then we come from David, and we come to Hezekiah, and then notice in verse 12. Well, look at verse. I want to go back to verse. I'm going to start reading verse 10. It says, Hezekiah father Manasseh, Manasseh father Ammon, Ammon father Josiah, Josiah father Jehoiakim, and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. And then it says, then after the exile to Babylon, you see Jehoiakim fathered Shealtiel, Shealtiel fathered Zerubbabel, and it gives all of the genealogies to Jesus. But I want you to look at verse 17, and he says right here, so all the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations. And from David until the exile to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the exile to Babylon unto the Messiah, 14 generations. Now, here I'm not here to get into all of the in and out of the of the Babel of the generation genealogies itself. But notice, I want you to pay attention to what he says about the exile or the generations to the exile of the Babylon, the exile to Babylon. And the reason why I wanted to stress this here, the reason why I wanted to stress this is because during this time, there is a major shift in the affairs of human, as God is dealing with man, that the major shift um, 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 of human affairs. So this Babylonian exile, this time here is a major shift, okay, in the affairs of man. There's human human events changes at this point, and this is where Daniel's prophecy comes in at, where we see Daniel's prophecy. Now we're going to come to this later. I'm not going to get off into this vision that God gave to Nebuchadnezzar. However, this is what the book of Daniel is about. So the first 6 chapters, we're going to see kind of a historic narrative, with the exception also of chapter 2, because this vision here is introduced. And it's introduced by God giving this vision to Nebuchadnezzar. And it turns out it is a prophetic picture, a prophetic timeline from Daniel's time, Nebuchadnezzar's time, to the end of the world. And of course, we'll get more detail to this in the book of Daniel, because this is really what Daniel's about. Then when we get to chapter 7, from chapter 7 to 11, the explanation, the different prophecies that we see, and that's what they are basically interpretations of this image. That's what Daniel's about. It is the interpretation of this image. Okay? Now, what is also a change here is we go from tribal, right? Communities, nations, empires, okay, to world dominating empires. And again, we're going to get more into this later. All right. So when we talk about the writings of the prophets, this is what they're structured around. Okay. So again, Daniel is going to be a very fascinating book. To me, if you understand Daniel, you understand a lot of what's going on in terms of prophecy, end time prophecy. And I'm kind of amazed that people don't really study Daniel like that. That they really don't. And to me, and here's my thing. So if your approach to Bible prophecy, you pick up the book and you read Matthew 24. Jesus specifically points to Daniel. Okay, he points to Daniel. But again, we'll get more into that when we get into Daniel. Let me go back and let's see here. Let's go to Daniel chapter 1 and then verse 1. I'm only just going to read the very first verse. It says, "In the 30th year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it." Okay, now I'm not going to go too far on that because actually I'm running out of time here, but let me just go back to just so we can get a timeline. So remember, this was our charts for the kings, the Old Testament kings. So you had the kings of Judah, and then you have the kings of Israel. You go all the way back to Rehoboam. Now remember, this is Solomon's son, and Solomon's son turned out to be a fool. Okay, because instead of he did not inherit the wisdom of his father, and he actually divided the nation. This is the point. You had uh, um, Saul, you had King. I'm sorry, you had Saul, you had David, and then you had Solomon. And then you come to Rehoboam. Through his foolish acts, he divided the nation. And so from that point to the Babylonian exile, you had two divided nations. You had the kings of Judah, which was the southern kingdom, and then you had the kings of Israel, which was the northern kingdoms. Okay, the king of Israel, the capital of the southern kingdom was Jerusalem, and the capital of the northern kingdom was Samaria. All right. So then, when you read through um, uh, Chronicles and Kings, you're reading these two kingdoms, and then you get to this point where Hosea is the last king of Israel or the northern kingdom, about 80 years before the fall of Jerusalem. And then we see the from Hezekiah on, we see the southern kings of Judah. And notice where we come to. We come to Jehoiakim. And that's where we are when we start with Daniel. This is what he starts off with, Jehoiakim. And he did evil. And then you see Jehoiakim, and then Jehoiachin, which is his son, and then Zedekiah, who was the last king. And they're carried off to Jerusalem. And they and I'll get back to this in the next study, because then this is where Daniel, in terms of the exile, okay, Daniel is one of the first group to be exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon. All right, guys, we will continue this. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to VP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.